Somewhere in the middle of the Bay of Bengal, surrounded by razor-sharp coral reefs and patrolled by the Indian Navy, sits a small patch of land roughly the size of Manhattan. No roads lead in, no signals come out, no visitor who has ignored its warnings has ever left with a good story to tell. This is not a place that simply keeps to itself. This is a place that has been actively, violently, and successfully keeping the entire world out for what researchers believe to be 60,000 years. And somehow, in an era where every corner of the planet has been mapped, photographed, and posted online, this island remains as unreachable and as deeply mysterious as it was the day humans first set foot on it. North Sentinel Island sits roughly 64 kilometers west of Port Blair in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, a remote Indian archipelago. The island itself covers about 60 square kilometers, blanketed almost entirely in thick tropical rainforest, so dense that aerial surveys can barely confirm the presence of human life beneath the canopy. The shoreline is fringed with coral reefs that make it nearly impossible for large vessels to approach without running aground. There are no ports, no roads, no infrastructure of any kind visible from the outside. What the island does have, the only thing it has ever shown to the world, is a community of people who want absolutely nothing to do with anyone who approaches their shores, and who have the weapons, the resolve, and the tactical intelligence to back that position up every single time. The people of North Sentinel Island are known to the outside world as the Sentinelese, a name given to them by outsiders since their own name for themselves remains completely unknown. What researchers have been able to piece together, largely through careful observation from a safe distance, paints a picture of a community that is extraordinarily self-sufficient. They are hunter-gatherers, moving through their forest and fishing in the coastal shallows, using narrow outrigger canoes propelled with long poles like punts. They build two types of shelters, large communal huts that house multiple family units, each with their own hearths, and smaller open-sided structures along the beach for single families. Their bows and arrows are sophisticated enough to penetrate metal, and accounts from encounters over the years confirm that their aim is remarkably precise. These are not people living in disorganized chaos. These are people who have mastered their environment so completely that they have needed nothing from the outside world for tens of thousands of years. The very first documented European encounter with the Sentinelese dates to 1867, when a British officer named Jeremiah Homfray sailed close to the island while chasing escaped convicts. He observed people fishing calmly on the beach, but the moment they spotted his vessel approaching, they vanished into the trees. Later that same year, an Indian merchant ship called the Nineveh ran aground on the island's reef, and all 106 survivors scrambled ashore. What followed was a sustained series of attacks from the islanders that the survivors had to fight off desperately until the Royal Navy arrived and rescued them. In 1880, a British naval officer named Maurice Vidal Portman actually managed to land on the island, and in what remains one of the most troubling chapters in the island's colonial history, captured 6 Sentinelese people and took them to Port Blair. 2 of them, an elderly man and an elderly woman, died almost immediately from exposure to outside diseases. The remaining 4, described as children, were returned to the island with gifts. Portman's own account expressed deep regret about the expedition, recognizing that the contact had likely caused irreparable harm to a community that had no immunity to the germs he and his team carried. That moment with Portman in 1880 may well explain everything about the Sentinelese relationship with outsiders. Researchers have long noted that the neighboring Andamanese tribes, the Great Andamanese, the Onge, and the Jarawa, all experienced catastrophic population collapses after sustained contact with the outside world. Disease, land encroachment, and exploitation devastated communities that had thrived in isolation for generations. The Sentinelese, whether through collective memory, instinctive caution, or learned behavior passed across generations, have responded to every subsequent approach with a ferocity that has kept those same forces entirely at bay. It is not savagery. It is, by any reasonable measure, survival. And for 60,000 years, by some anthropological estimates, it has worked better than almost any other strategy any community on Earth has ever employed. The 20th century brought repeated attempts by the Indian government to establish peaceful contact with the Sentinelese, with mixed and often dangerous results. A National Geographic-funded expedition in 1974 came close enough to leave gifts on the beach, including a miniature plastic car, some coconuts, live pigs, and aluminum cookware. The Sentinelese buried the pigs, ignored the car, and accepted the coconuts and the aluminum. Then one of the crew members was struck by an arrow in the thigh, and the team withdrew. In 1981, a cargo ship called the Primrose ran aground near the island during a storm, and the stranded crew sent a desperate radio message describing men on the shore armed with spears and arrows, building boats that looked intended for an attack. A rescue helicopter arrived before any confrontation could escalate. The most significant breakthrough came in January 1991, when anthropologist Triloknath Pandit and his colleague Madhumala Chattopadhyay, the first woman to ever attempt contact with the tribe, led a team that managed a genuinely peaceful exchange. Sentinelese islanders waded into the shallows to collect coconuts directly from the researchers' hands, a moment that stunned the anthropological world. But even then, the tribe made clear that any attempt to linger too long would be met with drawn bows, and the contact program was eventually discontinued over ethical concerns. The most widely known incident in the island's modern history is the fate of John Allen Chau, a 26-year-old American missionary who traveled to North Sentinel Island in November 2018. Chau had trained for years for the trip, believing he was called to bring his faith to what he described in his journal as a place that needed it urgently. He paid local fishermen to ferry him close to the island, made several attempts to approach the shore across multiple days, was shot at with arrows, and returned each time. On his final attempt, the fisherman watching from a distance reported seeing islanders on the beach and later seeing his body being dragged along the shore. His remains were never recovered. Indian authorities arrested several people involved in facilitating the illegal trip, but the Indian government made clear it would not take action against the Sentinelese, whose response to an uninvited trespasser was entirely consistent with every boundary they have ever communicated. Anthropologists and indigenous rights advocates were largely united in the view that Chau's death, while deeply tragic, was the foreseeable result of repeatedly ignoring the unmistakable signals of a community that did not want contact. Most recently, in March 2025, an American social media influencer illegally landed on the island briefly to film content for his audience, left a can of cola and a coconut on the shore, and was subsequently arrested by Indian authorities. A reminder that the fascination with North Sentinel has not dimmed, even as the legal and ethical case for leaving it alone has never been stronger.